this. We'll go ahead and start recording. And I keep getting notices, people keep registering right now. So we've got a few more people. It looks like they're going to be joining us pretty soon. But we've never had one of these Zoom meetings for the Pecan group. Well, I haven't anyway. I haven't been involved with any of them. But I had planned to have some workshops with Justin McDaniel and with John Hossey in a couple different parts of the state this spring in April. And of course, that didn't happen. So decided we would look at how we could make it work long distance. So we're social distancing, making sure we can try to get this, see if we can get you some information without being next to you. But so we're going to talk today about a few things that are I'm getting calls about and pictures about, and I know Phil's got some information he's going to talk about Pecan Casebearer in just a little bit. But we'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen, and we'll see if we can get everything to work right. All right.
It's working.
It's working all right. All right. So,
yep, working fine.
Okay. So I'm going to just go ahead and get started. And we're going to, I probably shouldn't introduce myself for those of you that are not in the classes or in the field days and things, but my name's Becky Carroll, and I'm the Associate Extension Specialist for fruits and pecans. And so I am going to show you what I've been seeing. Can everybody see all right? Phil, does it look okay? Looks okay? Okay. So I had a couple of people send me some pictures recently, and you can see we've got a couple of trees that aren't coming out very well. And so what's going on? Do you think it's that early spring or late spring freeze, I should say, or do you think it's that early fall freeze that we had, or maybe it's winter injury? But I really don't think we were that cold this winter. Maybe it's too much water. What do you think it might be? We're going to look at these things and go through and look at a little bit more pictures and maybe try to be detectives to figure out maybe what the reasoning is why these trees aren't leafing out too well. So this may be the biggie. We got below freezing that April 13th through the 20th. If you remember, March was pretty warm, but April turned off to be really chilly and cold. And that's the way it's been the past couple of springs. We've ended up with warm Marches, and it advances the foliage and the blooms on everything. And then we end up in April getting cold. And so Wes Lee, he works at Mesonet, and he's one of my friends. I think he might be on here today. He ended up getting me some maps together. And this is showing the hours below freezing that week of April 13th through the 20th. And so the big blue numbers are those number of hours that we were below freezing at those Mesonet locations. Now the small number may be more important than the blue number. The small gray number is actually the lowest temperature that was recorded at those Mesonet sites. Now at Perkins, it says we got to 30 degrees. And I wouldn't expect to see very much damage with 30 degrees. But our Mesonet site is way up on the hill at the station. And a lot of our pecan trees are at the very bottom of the station. And so it can be 2, 3, maybe 4 degrees cooler down in the low spots than it is up on the top of the hill. So that 30 degrees was probably much colder down in the low spot that we call the well field. And so whenever I looked at those pecan trees, the ones that were in the lowest spot, they had quite a bit of damage. to those lower branches. And it was about the two-thirds of the bottom of the tree were showing leaf burn. The top of the tree looked green and was fine. But it really depended a lot on location where we were seeing damage. And so if your site says, like I know down around the Red River, they had seen quite a bit of damage. They would be further along on the leaf development, and it shows they got down to 27 in some of those locations. But if their site is lower, like a frost pocket area maybe, they could be quite a bit colder than that. And so that's why site selection, if you're planting a new orchard, is extremely important. If you can find an area that has a little more elevation where that cold air will settle away from your planting, then you'll end up with hopefully some conditions that won't get as cold. It was what they call a radiational freeze. And so a lot of the time the sun warms the ground and keeps the heat in place, especially if we have clouds. But those nights that we got so cold that week, the clouds were gone. It was completely open sky. It was clear and it was very dry. And so all the heat escaped and it was very cold right at the ground level. So our damage is going to be on the lower portions and on the younger trees too, because they're a lot smaller, a lot lower, closer to the ground than some of our mature trees. So that's one thing to consider. So this is what it looked like in southern parts of the state. They got their coldest temperatures on that Wednesday on April 15th. And so you can see some of these trees, some of these are on younger trees, they got bit back pretty hard. And you can see, I don't know if my mouse is showing up here, but you can see some of the growing points on these clusters, these tissues, new foliage is burned back pretty heavily. So let's look at northeastern Oklahoma. They got cold on the 20th, on that Saturday morning. Weren't expecting to get that cold. And I was really surprised that we had freeze damage. They were surprised to wake up with those temperatures as well. So, meteorology is a science, but it's also, things change. So we don't know exactly how it's going to affect every location. But you can see this one, that growing point is still looking pretty green. And all the foliage on the tips have a little bit of leaf burn. And so the growing point's still intact with leaf burn around the edges. So we'll see how that maybe fares in a little bit. This is what it looked like in the well field at Perkins on the low branches in the lowest part of the station. And so, there's a lot of leaf burn on some of these. Here's the growing point right here. This is where our flowers would be developing on this primary shoot. And you can see it looks pretty brown, so it's probably a goner. It's probably not going to make it. And so we had several of those branches that were low and close to the ground, exhibiting, things that look like this. Now, if you could look up higher in the tree, there was just a little bit of leaf, little browning on the margins. And so most of our trees didn't look like they were going to have any damage at all. Our Merrimack planting, they were quite a bit further behind the cans and the Pawnee, and it didn't look like they had any damage on the Merrimack. Now I went out this morning in the wind, about blew away, and was taking some pictures of those trees that showed the worst damage. And so you can see on these pictures that these shoots, they've dropped all of those leaves that were damaged. And you can see the secondary buds and tertiary buds, they're starting to push. And so like on this picture on the right, the growing, the primary bud, has been frozen back and it's died. And we've ended up with new buds pushing. And then it's even got those further down on the shoot that are swelling as well. Here's another one on the bottom left side. This top bud's dead, but it's pushing new buds. So we'll have some new shoots going ahead to push out. I'm going to go ahead and document what these look like in the next few weeks to see what we look like as it goes along recovering after the freeze. but we'll see what happens. Now, there's some other things that may be causing those trees not to leaf out as well. I really hadn't thought about this. I forgot about it, but when I was talking to Charles Rolla earlier this week, he was talking about some growers that he's seeing having a lot of issue with their trees not ever leafing out. And they're attributing this to that Halloween freeze that we got. Those trees were fully leafed out. It was really difficult to harvest because there was such a heavy leaf load at that time. And so they hadn't started to acclimate, and they weren't getting ready for the cold period. They were just fully growing and had a full leaf load. And so this is what it looked like right before that Halloween time frame. And of course, I had on my phone a picture of Mike Morgan and his 7-day forecast showing that 24 degrees. So I was a little worried about what was going to happen after that freeze in our pecan trees. Now, this is what we experienced that next day on October 31st on Halloween. You can see the temperatures, the numbers are pretty small, but the entire state, except for maybe right around Idabel, got below freezing. And we didn't just get below freezing, we got down in the teens and low 20s in most locations, or the mid 20s over here along the swath where we have most of our pecan production in the state. And so those trees, that can be a big stress on them. And so I'm afraid that we're seeing some damage from this fall freeze this spring for the trees just not leafing out. And so you can imagine going from, I think in October we had 80s and 90s. It was pretty warm. And then just a few days before we got down into the 40s. And then all of a sudden we were at 22 at Perkins. I don't know that we had that much damage on our trees from that, but I think there are in other locations. And I'm posting some pictures that people have sent me from different areas of the state, but I really wonder if this isn't from that fall freeze early in the year. This is why we recommend people using those early ripening cultivars, not using the really late cultivars, because we know the earlier ones are going to start to acclimate and get ready for the winter a little bit quicker. But this tree on the right, it's a Pawnee, I believe, and it's in the northern part of the state. It just is not leafing out properly. And if you look at the close-up of one of the branches, a lot of the 1- and 2-year-old wood looks like it doesn't have any buds that are pushing. So this may be due to that freeze time that we experienced at Halloween. Now, what do we do if we have damage? I went back out and I took some pictures at the station. Here we've got some flowers that look great. And so what you need to do is continue with your management plan. Unless your trees are just completely wiped out, you need to continue taking care of those leaves that are still there, and hopefully the flowers that are there. So continue those zinc applications, continue with fungicide applications if they're needed for your variety in your area. And then if you haven't completed your fertilizer applications, you may want to go ahead and apply your fertilizer to keep those trees healthy and not stressed. So I'd recommend, watching for flower development and look for the female flowers as well as the male flowers of catkins. And I wouldn't be surprised if we might have some issues with pollination a little bit later. So some of those shoots that are pushing out new growth, they may have a few nuts on them, but I don't know if our timing is going to be right with our catkins and our pollination. So we'll see. If we do have some pollination problems, it's probably going to show up with a severe June drop. And we may talk about that a little bit later, but it could be an issue. So
Becky,
back to the, yeah.
Becky,
go ahead,
Charles pointed out that crop load may also have contributed to the freeze damage as well.
Could be. We did have a heavy crop load in places. That's true. Yeah.
we really, Dr. Graham found some Lakota in our orchard at McMillan that had
Mm-hmm.
a extremely heavy crop
Mm-hmm.
last year, and we did not crop in them. And
Mm-hmm.
2 out of the 5 trees are completely dead.
Okay.
And we're contributing that to heavy crop load. We had a lot of rain
Mm-hmm.
and good temperature in October.
Right.
So we had actively growing trees that were
Mm-hmm.
pushing new growth on, plus
Right.
that heavy load. The crop did not fill out, so they were all wafers. But whenever he checked them yesterday, 2 out of the 5 were dead. A third one was about 50% dead, and then the 2 that had the light crop were just fine. Looked just normal, and so
Yeah.
we think crop load probably had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, that's so important, and I really I hope people are noticing this and see that crop load management is something that really needs to be put into their management techniques, especially for those trees that do tend to overproduce. And so if we can keep those trees happy and healthy, no stress going into the winter, they're going to have a better chance to come out the other end without any freeze injury. So looking at those 2 trees that we saw earlier, you know, that one tree, it possibly could be a Halloween freeze, causing it not to leaf out this spring. And I'm not sure on the crop load. It looks like a lot of them were stuck in the tree whenever harvest came. And so it may be issue with crop load and that freeze event causing the problems. Now on the tree on the right, this is down in the southern part of the state near Ardmore. And these trees, they started to leaf out and then they ended up with spring freeze damage. And I asked the grower to take me some pictures, and he was going to head out there to take pictures, but had to wait a couple of days, and then ended up with a hailstorm coming right through after that freeze injury. So he had freeze damage and then large hail damage as well. So there's not very much left on that tree. So if I had to have hail damage, I'd probably want it at that time anyway. If that tree had gone ahead and redeveloped all those new shoots and buds and pushed on the secondary shoots, and then we got hail damage, it may have been a lot harder to come back. But it's not a good thing, but I think those trees will go ahead and push their secondary and tertiary buds, and they may not have much crop this year, but at least they're going to survive all right. But it's pretty sad. Just had back-to-back injuries there, but I think he'll do okay eventually. It'll come out okay. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about today was zinc, and I've had a lot of questions about zinc this spring. It is an essential micronutrient. Plants need zinc to grow properly, and it's often deficient in Oklahoma pecans. The 2 nutrients that we see pecans needing most each year will be nitrogen and zinc. And zinc is, if your pH in your soil is more than 6, it's usually not available to that tree. It gets bound, gets tied up to the soil particles. And so if you have a low pH, then they may be able to take up zinc from the soil. But normally in most areas of the state, we use foliar applications and to provide that zinc to the trees. So it's very important to properly mix your zinc before you apply it to avoid leaf burn, and use the proper rates for your trees. Now, when we see deficient zinc in trees, we see wavy leaf margins. They'll look kind of frilly, and then they'll have smaller leaflets and short internodes. So sometimes they'll look like rosettes. And so you can see that on some trees, especially on more vigorously growing trees. Those symptoms will show up a little bit easier. On mature trees, it may not be as obvious, and that's why we really stress using leaf analysis and taking those leaf samples in July to know where you are, what that tree is able to take up from the soil. So we recommend leaf sampling in July. So in our Oklahoma fact sheets, we usually recommend zinc sulfate, just 36% zinc sulfate. And it's for young trees, we recommend 1 to 2 pounds per 100 gallons of material. A lot of the time people may put that out, they'll mix it up and they'll spray it out with a handgun. Make sure that you're getting it on there where it's running off the leaves. Or you can use a air blast sprayer as well. We want to start these zinc applications when the first leaf is unfurled. And then we want to continue every 2 weeks until growth stops. And that's usually middle to late July when we see this growth slow down and stop. And on mature trees, we want to apply 4 to 6 pounds per acre. So we need to have our sprayer calibrated to know how much water is being applied per acre, to know how much zinc that we need to apply to our tank. And so when we start this, it's the same time period when those first leaves start to unfurl. And then we want to continue with the first and second generation Pecan Casebearer sprays. And if it's in an orchard that has really severe zinc deficiency or a very high input orchard that's growing very vigorously, then you might want to apply another application between that bud break and that first generation Pecan Casebearer. But use your leaf samples to show that your program, what you're doing, is working. It's important to monitor to know if it's being sufficient for your grove or your orchard. So there are other nitrogen products, nitrogen zinc products, special blends, there's liquids. Many of those products contain nitrogen. And some people think that nitrogen aids in the zinc uptake. And so they're recommending using these products. That nitrogen can be derived from urea, from ammonium sulfate, or from ammonium nitrate. There's all different types of nitrogen that may be in some of these products. The nitrate nitrogen is going to be less likely to burn the foliage than the ammonium nitrate. I was talking to Mike Smith, and he was explaining that the nitrate was less likely. And so that was something to consider. Now on those liquids, usually they're easier to mix up. They're not going to be as difficult to get mixed in your sprayer, but they may be a little more expensive. But in most cases, you're going to use less product per acre. Now, when you're applying nitrogen to the leaves, this usually isn't a good source of nitrogen fertilization. You're going to go ahead and have to apply nitrogen in other forms for your tree, for your nitrogen fertilization program. So I also have questions about chelated zinc. For soil applications, those zinc chelates are recommended over zinc sulfates because zinc sulfate gets tied up to the soil particles very quickly, and those chelates help that zinc to not get bound to the soil particles, and so it can release slowly and be available to the trees. But for foliar applications, looking at some other states' recommendations, they say zinc sulfate is better absorbed with a little urea, but zinc chelates also seem to be easily absorbed. I really think that we probably need to do a little more research in this area to see exactly what works best for especially our native groves and some of our new orchards that are planted. But we do know that the chelated zinc, it is more easily dissolved into the water solution than the zinc sulfate. Some of the products that I've been asked about this season is the ProSol. It's 18% nitrogen, 14% zinc, and 15% sulfur. And then I'm not advertising for any of these. These are just some that I've had questions asked about. And then Delta Ag Zinc Plus. It's a liquid that has 10% zinc and some sulfur as well. And then Azillo Zinc has 15% of the chelated zinc in that product. An Amend zinc product has 8% zinc or nitrogen and 9% zinc. So it's important to follow the label rates for application. They may be all a little bit different. The chelated products may take a little bit less than a regular zinc. And we know Charles was telling me earlier that most of the liquid zinc products are applied at around 1 to 1.5 quarts per acre. So a little bit less product than maybe some of the other, like the zinc sulfate 36%. So in very severely deficient orchards, you may have some shoot dieback as well. But this is something that we want to avoid by using our leaf sampling or leaf analysis. We don't ever want to get into this shape. Another thing that I wanted to just point out was the amount of rainfall that we've had this past year. This map shows 2019, or actually it's the rainfall from April 30th to April 30th, 2019 to 2020. And so in some areas, they're showing, maybe close to 85 inches of rainfall. And in the eastern part of the state, I mean, those black areas, that's very high rainfall. And even though, like in Perkins, we had 53 inches, but we averaged usually about 35 inches or so. So a lot more rainfall than what is normal. So that could have an effect on the root systems of our trees, especially if some of your trees looked like these last spring. And a lot of places were underwater for weeks. And so it's going to be interesting to see how these trees go ahead and leaf out this year and how well they produce this year. I know the trees on the right that were underwater for 2/3 to even some were completely covered, those lost those leaves that were underwater. The top leaves stayed there. They went ahead and refoliated the bottom half of the tree, and they even had a few nuts on top. But we know that when they stay that wet, the root system is going to start to decline. And so if we end up having a really dry season this year, really heavy crop load, those trees may suffer this year. So we just need to keep an eye on it and see how well they're surviving after having such a wet year this last year. All right, I think that is what I have. I probably went over a little bit. Does anybody have any questions? You can put some in the chat. If you've got questions, you can type some few things over there. Anybody have a question or want to?
Becky, was that, were those fish in that one picture?
Yes, it was
Wow.
fish, yes.
Wow.
So I imagine it smelled really nice too. So if you think of a question, be sure you can type it in the chat, or we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. So
Becky,
yeah,
thing
Charles.
I mention about the on your zinc products. I've ran across a lot of people that their water that they're using to mix the zinc with is high pH. And if that's the case, the powder or the zinc sulfate's a little harder to get to dissolve in the water unless you're using acid to lower that pH in the water. So a lot of growers are starting using the liquid zincs to help with that. And it will reduce some of the leaf burn that you can see with mainly the sulfur that's in the zinc products. Okay. And they could also use a buffering agent too, I guess, if they wanted to change their water and with the products. Okay. If they've got a high pH, something around 7, or some of our growers in North Texas, pH might be even up to 8. Oh yeah. If you lower that down to about 6 or below 6, it'll dissolve in the water a whole lot better. Okay. So Brad had a question. Said, is there any toxicity concern in the soil for long-term zinc applications? Brad, are you talking about foliar applications or soil applications? I know a lot of people apply zinc to the soil in other parts of the country to build up their zinc in the soil. Foliar applications just adding up over time. I've never heard of any issues with that. How about you, Charles? No, I've never. And you know, if you look in Georgia, they've been applying it for decades and haven't ran into problems. You can cause, they believe that's what's caused some of the nickel deficiency in Georgia, is the overuse or the over application of zinc. And the purification of the fertilizers, taking the nickel out of the fertilizers. And so that's why they've seen some problems with nickel another micronutrient that we test for with those leaf samples.
Okay. So yeah, sometimes if we apply nutrients, too much of one thing can cause a deficiency in another element. So we want to keep a balance, make sure that we're applying just what those trees are needing. And, you know, we don't want to waste our money and time applying fertilizer if we don't really need it, or if the trees don't need it. But generally, most people are going to see benefits from foliar applications of zinc each season. So especially on young trees, it's very important to get those trees growing and established. And then Riley had a question about a ground drench for very large trees to improve zinc uptake if one doesn't have equipment for a foliar spray. I don't know of anyone trying that. Do you, Charles, have you heard of anything like that?
They're working on some ground applied.
Okay.
They're actually doing through irrigation systems out in Arizona and New Mexico. They're showing some good results, but it's still in the testing phase. So right now we're not recommending it. And it really depends on what the pH of your soil is.
Right.
If you've got a lower pH, you might see some uptake. But if your pH is in the upper 6s or 7s, right now we would not recommend it.
All right. Any other questions? You want to move on to Phil? Phil, you ready to go?
Yeah, you ready? You want me to share my screen?
I think we're ready for you to share away.
Okay. Okay, let me see if I can get it to work.
All right. You are sharing, just need to find your slideshow. It's down at the right on the bottom. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
You got me there now?
We're good.
Okay, let's backspace 1. Okay, in case you don't know, I'm Phil Mulder, extension entomologist and department head of entomology and plant pathology. We're going to talk about pecan insect pests in the early season, what to look for today and what you're going to be looking out for tomorrow. One of the things I'm not going to talk about is, because it's too late, is phylloxera and scale control. So if you've missed that opportunity, you may suffer from some phylloxera damage. You may suffer from some scale insects this year. You might get some relief if you have heavy scale infestations by applying an insecticide, but for the most part, that should be done during the dormant season. And as far as phylloxera, that should be done before those pecan leaves reach 2 inches in length. So in case you need to reach me, the best way to reach me is by email. And there's my email address. And I have a lot of people that contact me about pecan questions. And if I don't know them, I just refer them to Charles or to Becky or to somebody. And but I'm a pecan grower myself, so I've come across some of these things from time to time. I'm not an experienced pecan grower like Charles, though, or Becky. My trees are real young yet. Okay, the first thing that we will see during the month of May, this generally occurs in May, just after phylloxera, but before the Casebearer time, is pecan sawfly. And this can be pretty severe occasionally, but it's usually light. And it's what they create are these little shot hole symptoms on the leaves themselves. The tree comes out of it. It's not going to kill the tree. Traditional types of insecticides work pretty well against this particular critter, but you don't want to use the insect growth regulators like Confirm or Intrepid, because those are specific to caterpillar pests. And while this looks a little bit like a caterpillar pest, it is not. It is the immature stage of a small wasp. So it will not, those products would not be effective against this particular pest. And we can see this during the early months or the early parts of May, maybe even late April in some cases. Where we usually see this to be a problem is in northeast Oklahoma more than anything else, it seems like. But occasionally it can occur down south as well. Some other springtime defoliators, and I won't go into the webworm situation too much because that's kind of like borderline spring and summer, and it can be a problem throughout the summer. But one of the things that growers will see is this large Catalcula larva, or Catalcula caterpillar. And it is a caterpillar. It has those true thoracic legs that are here, and then it has these prolegs on the back end. Can you see my pointer, Becky?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. And it's a rather large critter. You will notice it generally hiding. It's very good at hiding and being camouflaged against the twigs, any kind of small twig. But if you go to disturb it, it will literally throw a fit. And so it will frighten some people when you first go to disturb it. Once it matures, it becomes this, goes through the pupal stage, of course. And then after that, it goes to the adult stage. And it's a beautiful caterpillar. Most of the ones that we see are this black and white coloration, and they blend perfectly well into the trunk of trees. Some will have an underwing that's brightly colored with orange or red or different colors, but the primary one is this one. Blends in extremely well with pecan trees. Like I said, I'm not going to worry too much about webworm. You all know what those look like. Often get the suggestion that these are bagworms. There's a difference between bagworms and webworms. But the IGR products, like Confirm or Intrepid, work very well against either one of these types of critters. Another one that unfortunately we're starting to see more and more of is hickory shoot curculio. This is a significant pest sometimes in the early spring, primarily in the developing shoots. And it's sort of a legless larva that will tunnel into these shoots, and what you'll get is just dieback. You'll see these shoots sometimes that they won't be open like this. This is just to show you where the larva is in its tunnel. So it'll be closed up, and the terminal portion will just be dead, and will continue to die back all the way back to where the gallery of that curculio larva is. And this is what the adult weevil looks like. Not to be confused with the pecan weevil, much, much smaller. Another one that we do see occasionally, but it's not a significant problem in early spring, is the pecan spittlebug. It occurs in early spring about the same time as the Casebearer. It's controlled, once again, with traditional insecticides, and it would, in the IGRs would not be effective. So Confirm or Intrepid would not be effective against this particular pest. Other miscellaneous things, we talked about the spittlebug. Unicorn caterpillar is another one. Polyphemus caterpillar is another one. And this is a beautiful moth. This is a very large moth, 3.5 to 4 inches across. And then the prominent caterpillar with a rather large head and a greenish body with a sort of a purplish stripe going down that, and a white stripe going down the lateral sides of the body. These are only occasional pests, not something that I really worry about. And the IGRs will work against caterpillar pests, as I've said before. So if you have any type of problem with these, it'll be taken care of with an application of Confirm or Intrepid or one of those products. And then coming in May, and it's really not, I know it's May Day, it's May 1st, but it's not time yet for pecan nut casebearer. But this is the type of damage that we'll see on the young nutlets as the pecan nut casebearer larva starts to feed, and you'll get that accumulation of frass. I think most of you know what frass is. It's bug poop. And so you'll get that accumulation of frass. They'll oftentimes eliminate that particular nutlet and then go on to the next one. And they may even move out and go on to another cluster. But sometimes as the crop matures, they may just affect one nut because of the size of those nuts. So you'll see anywhere from 3 to 4 generations of this per year of pecan nut casebearer. So it's one we have to watch out for. Now, the reason I show you the adult, probably more than anything, is this is because this is the one we monitor for. And the key aspects about the adult that we're looking for when we look for them in the traps that I'll recommend is this large, or not large, but this row of scales about 1/3 back on the forewing. And it's very characteristic, and even when the moths get beat up a little bit, you can pretty much tell it's a Casebearer when it's captured in the pheromone traps. This is the larval stage, and this is the egg stage. It'll go from a whitish egg to a pinkish, even a reddish color just before it hatches, and that hatching period will only take about 4 to 5 days. So it can happen very quickly. And these are the traps we recommend. We recommend a Ferricon 6 trap. And of course, along with the trap, you have to have the pheromone source. It's a little rubber septum. I think I'll show you a picture of that in just a moment. And the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 critters, the 7 moths that you see in that picture that are sort of grayish with that stripe across the back, those are pecan nut Casebearer adults. Except you can see a couple of them are turned upside down, right here and right here. But they are pecan nut Casebearer. You can that's the nice thing about the pheromone that's placed in the sticky bottom. It does attract primarily pecan nut Casebearer in terms of that size of a moth and at that specific time. Now I throw this one, and this is one that Lewis is capturing. Lewis Morton is capturing down around Stratford right now, and I'm sure that Charles is probably capturing some of these as well. This is the pecan bud moth. This is the only other moth that we've seen in relatively large numbers in these traps. So the pheromone might be somewhat similar, but we really don't concern ourselves with these too much. They have kind of like a double diamond sort of shape on their wings that they fold over the body, more in a flat pattern than in a roof-like pattern, a peaked pattern. And they have a characteristically smaller head than most of the pecan nut Casebearers. So you really can't mistake them, and they generally come in early. So that's why Lewis is seeing these early around that Stratford area. Scouting. We generally scout about the end of May, maybe even mid-May, or even as early as late April, but 7 to 10 days after the first trap catch, we scout for eggs. If we examine 10 clusters per tree across several trees, then if we have done that, or if we reach 2 infested clusters, and when I say infested, that's either with eggs or with larvae, before we reach 310 clusters examined, then that's the time to place an insecticide in the field to control that infestation. If it's less than 2 clusters, if less than 2 clusters are found infested, then we can repeat the sampling in about 3 days, and just kind of follow that recipe to make the decision. Don't automatically assume you're going to have Casebearer every year. The second generation follows that about 6 weeks after that, and so forth and so on in terms of the next generation after that. And this gives you an idea of the economic thresholds and why we use that 1% infested clusters for first generation and 2% for second and third generation. This is the effects we can have on an on year versus an off year. You can see it's based really upon the number of damaged nuts in per cluster can be about 1,200 nuts or 18 pounds or $32 loss per acre on an on year, and 3 damaged nuts per cluster are 780 nuts or 13 pounds, which is about $23 of loss per acre. So you can't afford to let them have too much, but it's not a pest that we have to treat for every year, unlike some of the pecans that are grown in the southern range. Larvae may move about for about 2 days before tunneling into the nutlets. So you want to look for frass and webbing around the base. And a lot of times these larvae are very hard to find, and the eggs are even harder to find, as you can imagine. obviously the larvae enter the nut, so you don't really see the larvae for a very short period of time outside unless they sort of stick their head out. But the eggs are very difficult to find. So what I tell folks is mainly look for that frass and webbing at the base of the nut. That's a dead giveaway that you've got pecan nut casebearer. And they can destroy that entire nut cluster, maybe one or two or even more nuts in a cluster. Total days from capture of the first male moth to damage is anywhere from 12 to 16 days after capture. And like I said before, 3 to 4 generations per year, about 42 days apart. Here's evidence of pecan nut casebearer damage. A little bit of webbing, as you can see, in addition to that frass. And in this case, even though there's 3 nuts in this cluster, that casebearer is probably going to take every one of them. Now, in some years, when you have a really large potential yield, I should say, you can maybe afford to let the casebearer have 4 or 5, maybe even as much as 10% of the crop, but you're putting the casebearer in control as opposed to you being in control. And so if you put it in control for the first generation, thinking, oh, I'll just thin the crop out a little bit, you better be ready to protect that crop during that 42-day period after that first generation for the second and maybe even a third generation. So here's the pheromone source, and the pheromone source is a rubber septum that's just placed at the bottom of the sticky trap, and you can see there are several casebearer around. I magnify this one because it's kind of a faint, dark raised set of scales that show up on the sticky bottom, but they're characteristically different than anything else you would capture in the trap. Obviously, this is a fly right here. These are plant hoppers or leaf hoppers. And so you know that the remaining things that are moths are pecan nut casebearer. But that's that raised set of scales that you're looking for. And this is the type of trap that we recommend. There's the larva sticking its head out of the nut that it's already damaged and probably going to move on and do the dirty deed to another one. We want to detect the initial moth flight to set up what we call a biofix. So the way that we do that, the first thing you need is, of course, the traps. And here's a source for traps. You can contact customer service at trace.com. Trace is located in Adair, Oklahoma. Bill Lindgren is a graduate of Oklahoma State University, one of our distinguished alumni, as a matter of fact. And he owns and operates Trace Incorporated. They do a really good job. I don't doubt the quality of the pheromone that he produces and the lures that he dispenses. The one thing that I would tell you about is if you obtain the traps and you obtain the pheromone, they wrap them up in a package of 3. So immediately you should take the pheromone out and put it in the freezer if you're not going to use it immediately. So take the pheromone out, put it in the freezer. Once you set out the traps, every day, if at all possible, you should be checking them. And so that's what I've asked Lewis to do. That's what I've asked Charles to do, and Charlie down there. That's what we'll do at Perkins. If we have some other folks that want to run a trap for us that have, and what I'd ask you to do is, if we do have some extra traps and some extra pheromone. If you would be interested in this, just send me an email, and I'll try to get the traps and the pheromone to you, or you can stop by my office once OSU opens up, which we don't know what that date is yet, but I saw in my emails we've got an announcement from the president. So there's going to be some indication about that. But you can contact me via email and we can work something out if you need to obtain a trap and some pheromone. The only thing I would insist upon is that you live in your orchard or near your, and I'm talking like on the edge of your orchard. My history has revealed to me that if I ask a grower who has a field even 2 or 3 miles away, they're not going to be out in their orchard every day. Whereas if you live on the edge of your orchard or in your orchard, you're going to be out there every day. You're going to have to be out there. And you can put the trap really close to your house in that case. It doesn't matter. I'd like it to be open to the wind so that the pheromone can be dispersed. But once you capture moths on 2 consecutive days, that moth flight has begun. So that's your biofix. That's your biofix. And I give the example of orchard 1, 2, and 3 here, because in this case, orchard 1 caught something on May 1, and then they caught 2 more on May 16th, and then they caught 2 more on the 17th. So May 16th is the biofix, because that was our first capture, followed by another capture the next day, 2 days in a row. In this case, on orchard number 2, we caught another one on May 16th, but we didn't catch anything for another few days, 3 days. So our biofix in this case, because we caught 3 here and 5 here, is actually May 19th. So you kind of get the gist of it here. In this case, on the orchard number 3, the biofix is May 18th. So it will vary based upon when you captured moths 2 nights in a row. After the biofix, about 10 days after that biofix, you'll get 10% of the eggs deposited. 13 days after the biofix, about 25% of the eggs will be deposited. And that's the time when you begin scouting, at about 13 days after that biofix date. And you can access the pecan nut Casebearer scouting procedures in our fact sheet 7189. Every 3 days, you can look for eggs and or damage, and follow that scenario I gave you before about 2 infested clusters before you reach 310 to treat. And treatment is not always warranted. Keep that in mind. So scout carefully and scout at least every 3 days until you've reached a decision, or until the traps stop capturing moths. Approximately 42 days after that first peak in moth captures, you'll see a second generation that'll occur. So you can repeat the process. You do not necessarily, if you've done the job of taking the pheromone out and put it in the freezer before you utilize it, or setting it out immediately, you don't have to change that pheromone source. But it's a good idea to do so. You can use a fresh pheromone source. It's not a bad idea. We have seen the pheromone work almost all season long in some cases, but you don't have to. You can use a fresh pheromone source. So you'd have to change that little rubber scepter. In terms of control, apply something gentle on beneficials like Intrepid or Confirm. I said one of the suggestions I've given before is don't use Intrepid Edge. Intrepid Edge is okay. There are other. It's okay. It's good material. There's nothing wrong with it. But it has 2 active ingredients. So if resistance becomes a problem down the road, it's not right now, but if resistance becomes a problem for that particular compound, then it's resistance to 2 potential active ingredients, because Intrepid Edge has 2 active ingredients. I like the idea of just using 1, and then you can rotate to something else. Then the thing to rotate would be to something organic like Javelin or Intrust or Dipel. There's a lot of different choices out there, but most of those other choices, like the pyrethroids, are not too gentle on beneficials, and they can lead to some other problems. One of the things that we kind of saved the pyrethroids for is weevils, pecan weevil. And if you're using pyrethroids early in the year and using it for pecan weevil, you could set yourself up for a scale problem. Which is what we've kind of seen at the station. So you kind of got to watch the use of pyrethroids, especially using them too much. And that's about all I have. I'm going to stop sharing and come back here and see if there's any questions.
All right. Anybody have questions for Phil? You can
It was all clear as mud.
You can either unmute yourself. You can, I think your space bar, or you can hit the little microphone on your little square if you want to say something, or you can type it in the chat if you have a question.
Now, if we get to do this again, we'll talk about weevils the next time, but we're too early in the season to concern ourselves with weevil. Except get your traps, get your circle traps out there and get them. Right. Don't get them out there, but purchase them.
I think this season may be a good good time to go ahead and order some of your things early this year, because shipping is slow, and so things aren't when we they're not always there when we need them right away. So make sure that you kind of make a list of what you might be needing in the next couple of months, and then figure that out and have them in your possession until, because it's always good to have it instead of trying to find something at the last minute.
I got a question from Dan Cluck concerning overwintering insects. Yeah, there's several things that can overwinter in an orchard that are caterpillar pests, walnut datena or walnut caterpillars, webworms, and so forth. The only thing in terms of what I worry about during the overwintering part, and I mean when that tree is really dormant, are scale insects and maybe a little bit of phylloxera. Because you can do something about those during that overwintering time before the buds break or before you see any green tissue. What we like to do during that dormant season is utilize a dormant oil. And dormant oils work by a couple of different methods, but primarily they act as suffocators to suffocate things like scale insects. And they're very effective. But we have to use it on dormant trees, a dormant oil on dormant trees. We don't wait until the pecans start budding.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, David.
Okay, I'm new to this. I'm on my cell phone. Everything's not working quite right. But you mentioned not to spray for the PNC if you don't see anything in the traps. My first year, we didn't see anything in the traps, so we didn't spray. And we had a huge amount of problems with webworms.
Oh, with webworms, yeah.
I was said, well, you're supposed to spray anyways to kill the webworms. So shouldn't you spray just for that reason?
Okay, so the question is, should you spray just for the purpose of controlling webworms? And if the webworm if you're saying you had a huge amount of problems with webworms, I would say, yes, you could spray and you could use the IGRs. And that's the advantage. If there's any advantage to treating pecan nut casebearer when you don't necessarily see any moths or you don't necessarily see any infestation, you don't perhaps reach that 1% damage level early in the season, the one advantage to using something like one of the IGRs early is it has an incredible sticking power, an incredible residual power if you use it with a good spreader sticker. And it does give you the advantage of controlling the early arrivers of webworm. This is why a lot of commercial orchards do not have problems with webworm, because they routinely treat for pecan nut casebearer. So that's a good point to make, David. But it's not something that we all have to do, because not everybody has a problem with webworm.
That was the only year I had a problem. I've sprayed every year since.
Yeah. Where are you located?
On Muskogee.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You will probably always have a problem with webworm, unfortunately.
All right.
But you can make that a separate application if you don't have pecan nut casebearer. It's just about 3 to 4 weeks after the time when you would typically spray for pecan nut casebearer in Oklahoma.
Okay.
So probably instead of the first part of June for you, it might be the end of June to control webworm.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? You can unmute yourself or you can type in the chat. I've got one question poll that I'm going to see if it will launch and see if you can answer for me. We'll see if this works. All right. So if you would like to meet again on Zoom for a June update, answer yes. If not, if you don't like Zoom, then you can say no. It's trying to find ways to still connect with people. And I think probably in June, we will start having a little more ability to meet with people, but still probably social distancing. So we may have to continue this through the summer with doing virtual meetings. The OPGA meeting is canceled for June. If you haven't heard that, the meeting June 10th through 12th is canceled. And so we're hoping to have a field day or a one-day meeting in the fall when it's safe to get together, so we can have conduct the business for the OPGA and have some educational meeting at that time. But it's all kind of wait and see for now. So it looks like everyone is so excited to have another Zoom meeting. So we will try to get that on the schedule. I know we're right at an hour that we promised we would try to keep it within an hour. Charles, you, Charlie, Jen, anyone want to add anything before we leave? Anything? All good? All right, well, I will be sending you a little survey to get some information for what you might want to see in the future, and to give you a chance to tell us what we can change up and do differently. I want to thank you guys for all coming to my kitchen with me today, and had lots of company today in my kitchen. And so if you come back another time, I'll fix you some pecan pie, and we'll enjoy a piece of pie together. But
I'm going to hold you to that, Becky.
Anytime, Phil. And so I appreciate everybody joining in, and you know how to get a hold of me, and I will keep posting to the Facebook page. I did record this session, and so it will be posted. I will send it to AgCom and see if they can help me clean it up and get it posted as well. So if you know someone that missed today, they can watch this a little bit later. So thanks to everyone for coming. Phil, you have anything else?
That's it.
All right.
Thank you for attending, everyone.
All right. Stay safe, guys. Love seeing everybody. Take care.
Bye. Bye, Beck.
Bye-bye.